Everyone. Okay. Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. And this is Masechet Zevachim. And this is our 7th class. Today we are going to be reviewing Daf 46 through Daf 50. And as I mentioned, next week we will also be meeting on Monday night, Be'ezrat Hashem, at 9 o'clock. Another announcement is that this week of learning has been anonymously dedicated in honor of Rabbi Chaim Bravender, Rabbi David Fink, Rabbi David Brovsky, and the staff of Web Yeshiva. And this is just so that you should know that it was dedicated, that this week was dedicated, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we should have good learning. Okay, so Daf 46 speaks about the fact that the blood, if you remember, we were talking about that the blood is excluded from the prohibition of something that becomes impure in the temple, and notar. Notar is when something is left over overnight or longer than it's allowed to be left over in the temple. That is a prohibition, but blood is not part of that prohibition. Now, there's a verse that teaches that blood, as we know, is used for atonement of the sin, but it is not part of the prohibition of me'ilah. Me'ilah, if you remember, is when someone misappropriates sanctified items, what you might call stealing from God. That's called me'ilah. That prohibition does not apply to the blood as well. Okay, this week's class is a little complicated. We're going to be talking a lot about different expositions from the text. So the Gemara tells us that we have two themes or two topics that speak about certain prohibitions, and it teaches us that if we have two topics, we could not learn from those two to a third or to even more topics. However, if we have three sources, we could learn to a more general category. So what are these topics that we were going to talk about? Trumat hadeshen, which is removing the ashes from the altar. It's something that was done every morning. And the clothing of the kohen, of the priest. These are two verses that we cannot learn to other subjects. And now the Gemara explains that the clothing, again, the clothing of the kohen, you cannot use it after it's already like finished being used, so you can't use it afterwards. So too, the trumat hadeshen, when you take the ashes off. And then maybe we can learn from here that me'ilah, again, this like stealing from sanctified items, maybe that applies also after use, as we mentioned with the clothing of the kohen. And we say no, only for these things, again, the ashes and, or the ashes from the altar, from the mizbeach, and the clothing of the kohen, but not about from the blood, right? We can't learn it to blood because that is a different topic. Okay, back to blood. There are 3 verses that teach that blood is not subject to the laws of impurity, to notar, as we mentioned before, to leftover, and to me'ilah. Again, me'ilah does not apply to the blood. And why is that? Because the blood is a something that makes the worship permissible, what's called in Hebrew a matir. Matir means it makes something else permitted to be done, which we'll talk about in a minute. And therefore, it is not subject to pigul as well. If you remember, pigul was the wrong intention when the priest is doing the service. Okay, we have 3 verses speaking about the shlamim sacrifice, the peace offering, that if a person who is impure eats from the shlamim, which is sanctified. So the verse actually speaks in a general statement, which is called a klal, then a specific statement, which is called a prat, and therefore it includes other things. What else does it include? Even if the person ate non-edible things, that would still be considered problematic. Or maybe it also comes to include the inner sin offerings that we learned about previously. Maybe they are also included in this category. Okay, if again, so we talked about things that are inedible and impure, and if a pure person eats it, that actually is a machloket. But if the person is impure and eats something inedible, then everyone agrees that you do not get lashes for that transgression. Or maybe the machloket is in both of those things, whether the person is impure or the meat is impure. Or the opposite, the machloket is about an impure person, but everybody agrees that if the item is impure, if the pure person eats that item, then that person will get lashes. Okay, next Mishnah at the bottom or the middle of Daf 46. A person who is slaughtering a sacrifice, right, doing shchita on a korban, on a sacrifice, needs to have 6 things in mind. Now, if you remember, in the past 45 daf, we've been mentioning all the things they're not allowed to have in mind. So now let's talk about things that they need to have in mind. Okay, so they have to have in mind the type of sacrifice that they are sacrificing, who the owner is, that the sacrifice is for God, and that it's for the fire of the mizbeach, of the altar. It is for the aroma for God, right? The aroma should be for God, the reach, right? The aroma, and it should be pleasant for God. And excuse me, if it's a sin offering or a guilt offering, an asham, then it needs to be for the specific sin that the person transgressed. Now, that's opinion number 1. You have to have all of those things in mind. Or, right now, even if the kohen did not have these things in mind, it would still be valid because it's based on what the court says that the sacrifice is going to be like. That is the default, and therefore, really, it would be okay. So now the Gemara asks, what is the source for this Mishnah? Okay, so there's a verse in the laws of the olah, of the burnt offering, that says that you must have intent for the right sacrifice. And it says, right, so it's going to go through the whole verse, right? Fire, right? You have to have in mind that it's going to be totally burnt by the fire. Reach, again, that it needs to be roasted. The whole process needs to be on the mizbeach. Nachat ruach, it should be pleasant for God. We have to do what God asks from us. Now, let's say you had a sin offering, a korban chatat, and you sacrificed it for an olah, a burnt offering. It would be invalid. Let's say you had a chatat, again, a sin offering, but you slaughtered it for your barbecue on Sunday afternoon, what we would call chulin. Right? Chulin means not sanctified, something mundane. That would be valid. That is okay. Obviously, you did not do the sacrifice, but you didn't invalidate that sacrifice. Only another, right, having in mind the wrong sacrifice will invalidate the korban, but not if you have something mundane in mind. Let's say you have no intent, right? You're not thinking about anything. You're thinking about what you had for lunch. Then the sacrifice is valid, but if you have right, maybe if you have again something mundane in mind, maybe that would not be okay. So Daf 47 explains that if the person thinks this korban is actually mundane, right? He says, oh wow, I'm going to slaughter this sheep. I can't wait for our barbecue tonight. And he thinks it really is mundane, right? He doesn't realize that it's sanctified. So then that would be invalid, as opposed to thinking that it is a sacrifice, but I want to make it mundane, which would be also problematic. Only the kohen, only the priest can affect pigul. Remember again, pigul is improper intent of the sacrifice, or maybe even the owner. Again, a person, right? Let's say Aliza wants to bring a sacrifice to the Beit HaMikdash. She brings her animal, she gives it to the Kohen. Let's say the Kohen thinks all the proper things, but Aliza is thinking, you know what? Instead of eating the meat today, I'm going to save it for 3 days from now when my family is coming to Jerusalem. I want to have a big barbecue. I'm going to eat the meat in 3 days. Now, again, one opinion is that does not affect the sacrifice. It's only what the kohen is thinking. Another opinion is no, even the owner's intent can mess up the sacrifice, right? If the owner has the wrong intent and the kohen does the avodah, the actual service, then one opinion is it invalidates the sacrifice. Okay, some opinions say that a Jew cannot slaughter an animal for a non-Jew. Why? Because exactly what we just said. The non-Jew is thinking, oh, I can't wait to let's say, burn this animal for Zeus, right? Even though the Jew has the right intent, but the non-Jew is thinking about his idol, and therefore it invalidates the sacrifice. Okay, with that, we finished the fourth chapter of this Masechet. Okay, let's start the fifth chapter. So the Mishnah tells us, one second, I'm actually going to share my screen because we have some pictures. Hold on a minute. Okay. One second, but I want to, okay. I guess, okay, I'll keep it like this, even though I don't like, I always like to have north on top, but you see at on the side, it has our like coordinates, so, or not coordinates, directions. Wait, let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay. The north of the temple is on the right, the south is on the left. We enter the temple from the east and we're facing west. Okay. The altar is in the middle, if you can see. In front of me is the big building, which is the sanctuary, the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Okay, so now the Mishnah tells us that. Okay, so let's learn two phrases. One is right, kodshe kadshim, which means sanctified, right? Like double, very sanctified. Okay, kodshe kadshim are sacrifices that only are either burnt completely or where the kohanim are the ones that can eat the meat. Okay, that is the highest level of sacrifice. The next level is what's called kodshe kalim, which literally means like lesser sanctified. And these are sacrifices where the owner can also partake in the meat. Okay, so kodshe kachim, kodshe kalim, again from the word kal, which means lenient or easier or less. Okay, so now the Mishnah tells us Kadshe Kadshim, again, the highest level of sacrifices, need to be slaughtered in the north area of the courtyard. Okay, now north will be to the right of the altar. We're going to see a machloket if it means A, B, or C. Okay, everyone agrees that it's B, which is the north of the altar, literally. There's a machloket about A and C. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. Now let's go through different sacrifices. Okay, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, they, again, these are Kodshe Kachim. They are sacrificed, they are slaughtered in the north. You collect the blood in the north, and their blood is sprinkled inside the sanctuary, inside Kodesh HaKodeshim, in front, and then in front of the parochet, the curtain, and on the gold mizbeach, on the gold altar. One second, hold on a minute. Let's see if I have more pictures. Oh, no. That's not yet. Okay, we'll leave this here. Okay, and on the gold mizbeach, all of the applications are essential. If you remember, we learned it last week. All of the applications of blood that happen in the sanctuary are essential. And then leftover blood is poured onto the base of the altar. Wait, I thought I have a picture of that. Hold on a minute. A minute, please. Okay, here we go. Now we're facing north is on top. Okay, north is on top. This is a picture of the altar, again, from the top looking down. It had a base, what's called the yisod. Yisod literally means the foundation. It had a yisod that went around the north side, the west side, and if you can see a little bit of the corner of the east and of the south, if you can see those little corners. So this is the area where they would pour the leftover blood from a sacrifice. Okay, so hold on a minute. So the korban that we were just talking about, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, the blood that's left over gets poured on the western side of the altar. Why? Because we can understand here, right? When you come out of the sanctuary, you're at the west side of the altar. Everyone understands? Okay. Great. Okay. However, says the Mishnah, this is not essential to pour it on the base, and therefore, if something gets messed up in the middle, that is okay. Next, the sacrifices that get burnt, that are brought inside and then burnt outside of the temple, these are the parhelem davar, right? The bull when the nation sins, or the bull when they do idolatry. We learned about that in Avodah Zarah. We learned about that in previous Masechtot. These animals need to be slaughtered in the north, collect the blood in the north. The blood is sprinkled in the Kodesh, again, in the sanctuary, and on the gold altar, the mizbeach that's in the sanctuary. And as we said, all the blood applications are essential because they're happening in the sanctuary. When I say sanctuary, I mean in the building that is to the north of the to the west of the altar, in the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKodeshim. That's what I mean by inside or in the sanctuary, as opposed to the courtyard, which is called the Azarah, right? Which we're going to call, remember we did this last week, we called it outside, but it's not outside of the temple. It's still within the temple boundaries. Just we're comparing inside the building, outside in the courtyard, but there is still great sanctity in both of these areas. Okay. Again, the same thing. The leftover blood is poured on the west side of the foundation. That is not essential. And then those animals are brought outside of Jerusalem. Now I really mean outside. And they are burnt in a place called the Beit Hadeshen, the house of the ashes. It was outside of Jerusalem, and it was burnt. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain that, one second, please. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Okay, so now the Gemara explains that every time you collect the blood, it needs to be in a sanctified vessel, what's called a kli sharet. Kli means vessel. Sharet means in service, right? A service vessel. That is where you collect the blood. Okay, Daf 48 teaches us that there's a verse when it speaks about the burnt offering, the korban olah, it needs to be done in the north. Okay, so now again, this whole masechet is filled with what we call in Hebrew limudim, right? We're going to learn from one verse to another, from one topic to another. We're going to go into great detail in a minute about this. Okay, the verse teaches that an olah needs to be slaughtered in the north. From that, we're going to learn that the sin offering, the chatat, is also going to be done in the north, because it's because, right, again, we're going to learn chatat, the sin offering, from the olah. Now, the Mishnah mentioned the inner chatat first, because this is more dear to God. It's chaviv. Chaviv, it says here chaviv to the teacher who taught this, because it's an inner sacrifice, therefore it's on a higher level. Okay, the verse states that the goats are slaughtered in the north, and then it says, ve'im min hadam, right? Also, right? Ve'im, ve'im min hatzon. It also applies to the livestock, the sheep and the goats. What does it mean? Ve'im, right? And also, it's also teaching about the par, about the bull that is brought as well. Okay, now, some opinions hold that you can learn. So what happens now? We had one verse and it was followed by another verse. Now, generally, the way we learn from one to the other is we learn it in a forward motion, right? Verse 1 will teach about verse 2 because it comes after it. Interestingly enough, that in this case, it's verse 2 that is teaching about verse 1. And there's a machloket if you can teach backwards, what we would call backwards, right? Can verse 2 teach us about verse 1 that comes before it? Some people say it can, some people say it cannot. Okay, then the Gemara mentions, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute, the Gemara has a machloket, which way of understanding verses is better, a hekesh, I'll explain in a minute, or bzeira shava. And we're going to talk about this extensively in a few minutes. A hekesh is where two topics are mentioned in the same verse, right? So let's say a verse says, this is what you should do for the olah and for the chatat. Okay, that is a hekesh. We're going to learn olah, chatat, right? Because they were in the same verse, they must be related somehow. Excuse me a minute. Okay. Excuse me. That's a hekesh, two topics in one verse or in one verse right after the other. Another option is gzeira shava. Gzeira shava is the same word used in two separate contexts or two separate verses, meaning totally far away from each other, right? Sham, sham, uba, uba, right? Those words link the two verses, and therefore we learn one from the other. So there's a machluket, which one is a stronger connection? One opinion is hekesh, one is gzeira shava, or everyone agrees that hekesh is stronger. Again, hekesh, same verse, two different topics in the same verse, or one verse right after the other also. Okay, so the Torah says, there's a verse that says, Zot Torat Ha'asham. This is the Torah of the guilt offering, the asham. Now, Torah here doesn't mean like the book, the Torah, but it means like this is everything we're about to say has to do with the asham. So therefore the Gemara tells us that this verse combines all the laws of the asham, even though there are different types of ashamot. There are different we learned this a while ago, that there are different there are different types of ashamot, of ashams, but there's something that's going to be similar to everyone, and that is that there's a minimum value to the asham offering because of this verse. Okay, a verse says that you need to slaughter the chatat, the sin offering, in the same place as the olah. So again, right? Chatat is linked to olah. It says that olah has to be done in the north. Therefore, chatat has to be done in the north. And since collecting the blood, Kabbalah, is right afterwards, it also has to be done in the north. And the kohen himself needs to be standing in the north. Okay, the next concept that the Gemara explains is that if a verse repeats a law that we already learned, it comes to teach us that service is essential. Okay, it is essential. And therefore, if it's repeated, that's when we know that that's essential. Okay. The sin offering, the chatat of the nasi, of the leader of the Jewish people, has to be done in the north, but not the goat of the princes of, it's called Seir Nachshon. This was when the princes, the Nisi'im, in the time of the desert, brought their sacrifices. Again, this was a one-time thing, but when they brought those sacrifices, those actually did not have to be done in the north, but in general, it does need to be done in the north, right? It says, V'shachat oto, you have to slaughter it. What does that mean? It teaches that the animal and the kohen must be in the north. And if, again, north of the altar. And if not, it's invalid. Or maybe Vishachat Oto teaches that the bird offering does not need to be done in the north, right? The sacrifices that we just mentioned must be done in the north, but the other ones do not have to be done in the north. Or maybe it's teaching that the Pesach does not have to be done in the north. Or it might be teaching that the animal has to be in the north for the chatat, for the sin offering, but not the person who is slaughtering. Meaning, a person can, if you remember, we learned that not only a kohen, but anybody can slaughter a sacrifice. So you could be standing on the outside and kind of stick in your hand or stick in the sword or the knife and slaughter the animal, even if you yourself are not standing in the Azarah, in the courtyard of the Beit Hamikdash on the north. But as we said before, the kohen that is doing Kabbalah must be, that's collecting the blood, must be in the north. Okay, Daf 49 teaches us that okay, we said that we learned the chatat, the sin offering, from the olah, from the burnt offering. Now, the Gemara says if you're going to learn one from the other, it can't be that the chatat is more stringent than the olah. How could that be? If you're learning, right? If I'm learning A and then I learn B from A, it can't be that B is more stringent if I learned it from A. It doesn't make sense. Or the Gemara says, wait a minute, maybe it can be more stringent. Right? We see from Maser Sheni, right, from the tithe that's taken, that a secondary thing can be more stringent than the primary thing. And we say, no, it's not that it's more stringent, it's just less sanctified. Or maybe we learn this concept from tumah. Tumah is where I have an animal that I sanctified to be a sacrifice. Then I say, oh, you know what? I have a better sheep. Let's make that sheep the sacrifice. So you can transfer the sanctity to another animal, and that's called tumah, but the first animal does not lose its sanctity. Right, as opposed to, if you remember with the tithes, if you remember, we could redeem something, the sanctity goes, let's say, to money, and the fruit or the produce becomes mundane, chulin, it loses sanctity. Here, in the case of sacrifices, that is not the case. The kedusha, the sanctity, can be transferred, but it doesn't leave the original animal. Okay, that's called tumah, and there's a whole masachet called masachet tumah. But we see that there is a case where the secondary animal can be more stringent than the first. Now, you just said that that it doesn't work. So the Gemara says, no, we can compare it to tumah. Let's try to compare it to Pesach, a korban Pesach. It itself does not need smicha. Smicha, if you remember, is when a person leans on the animal to transfer their maybe guilt, their intentions to that animal. So a Pesach does not need smicha, but one second. However, if it is left over, right, if you don't give the Pesach on Pesach and it's left over to after Pesach, it becomes a shlamim, and then it does need smicha. That seems to say that the secondary thing is more stringent than the first. The Gemara says no, it basically becomes a different sacrifice, right? It becomes a shlamim, therefore it's not the same case. Okay, we said that an asham, a guilt offering, needs to be done in the north, and we learn it from olah. The verse connects the asham and the olah, and it's repeated. Therefore, we see that it is essential. Okay, another rule about learning from different verses. If a verse singles out something to teach a specific law, then a verse has to come and put that idea back into the general category, and then you could learn that new law back to the general category. Okay, so the Gemara gives an example. Chatat asham, right? The asham is like a chatat, and then it talks about it takes out the concept of a certain type of asham, the asham of the mitzorah, of the person who has leprosy. It was singled out because that sacrifice is very unique. You have to put blood on the earlobe, on the thumb, and on the toe. But then it goes, the Torah afterwards puts it back into the category of, right, chatat asham. The chatat is like an asham, and therefore we learn that all ashams have certain laws that are similar to them, even though some ashams are different than others, right? Even though there's some differences, there there still is a general category and a general law. Okay. Okay. Now comes I would say a complicated part, because it is very technical and very, I don't want to use the word theoretical, but more fundamental in terms of principles. Okay, so wait, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Second. Okay. Okay, can you read it? Okay. There's no test at the end of this, so we don't have to get too deep into this concept, but let me explain it to you, what we would call outside, not in the Gemara, and then we'll go inside. Okay, we have seen, and we will see in a minute, there are there's more, but the four most popular ways to um, to understand a verse are the four things that you see on top. Again, hekesh, gzera shava, kal vachomer, binyan av. Okay, these are principles or rules by which we interpret the verses in the Torah. When I say we, I mean the Gemara, not we. I mean, we will read about them, but we don't make them up. Okay, again, let's just explain each one. Hekesh, two topics in one verse or in two verses, one right after the other. Gezerah shava, the same word in two distant verses. Okay, and again, it's going to link it. Kal vachomer is more conceptual, not based on words, more in terms of if this is the law for something that is again, kal vachomer. We have lenient and we have stringency, right? So kal vachomer is if something is true for something lenient, right? If I say you can't touch the oven when it's cold, then for sure you can't touch the oven when it's hot. Okay, right? That wasn't so accurate, but lenient, stringent, right? If there's a law for something lenient, then kal vachomer, again, kal means lenient, chomer, chamur means stringent, then all the more so, it should apply for something stringent, okay? That's kal vachomer. The last one is binyan av. Binyan av is one topic that's learned from another topic, meaning we're going to create a general category that's going to include a bunch of other things inside, right? I'd like to make a general rule so that I can learn, right, specific things from one another. Okay, now the Gemara is going to ask in the next daf and a half, if I learn something through again, hekesh, gzera shava, kal vachomer, or binyan av, okay, I learn A from B. Can I now go and teach B to C? Okay, so let's say I have B. Let's start with A. I have a verse that has A. From A, I learn B. Now, can I take B and teach it to C? Okay, now what does this mean? Now we're going to go through all of these permutations. If I learn something through a hekesh, can I now go and teach it through another hekesh to something else? Okay, that is the question. Okay, now Rashi says, and basically we're going to go through each one. The Gemara takes each heading, something that's learned through a hekesh. Can I learn it? Can I use it to teach a hekesh? Can I use it to teach a gzera shava? Can I use it to teach a kal v'chomer? Can I use it to teach a binyan av? The next one, gzera shava. I did a gzera shava. Now, can I use that to teach through a? Okay, you understand. Okay, so that's basically what the Gemara is going to do. This is a summary of that, but now we'll read it. We'll read it inside. Okay. So now, if you learn something from a hekesh, can it teach through a gzera shava? So we say, let's learn from Sarat. Again, the Gemara is going to bring different opinions and different cases. Here we have hekesh and gzera shava, and it seems that you can learn hekesh and then gzera shava, or no, you can't. And the Gemara says that the case that you brought has nothing to do with the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore you cannot learn hekesh, hekesh from hekesh, and you cannot learn hekesh and then teach a gzera shava. Daf 50. How about hekesh and then kal vachomer? The Gemara says yes, you can do that. What about hekesh and then binyan av? The Gemara says yes. It's learned from the asham, or maybe not so sure if you can do that. Next, we're moving over one. Gzera shava. Can it teach through a hekesh? So we're actually going to say it's a machloket. One opinion is you can, and one opinion is that you cannot. What about gzera shava and then a gzera shava? The Gemara says, yes, we learn it from the bread with the korban todah, and it teaches that you need fine flour for each one of the breads that are made for the korban todah, the Thanksgiving sacrifice, and therefore maybe you can learn gzera shava after gzera shava, or maybe you learn it from the bull of the kohen gadol. But either way, it seems that you can learn gzera shava and then teach to another gzera shava. What about gzera shava to kal vachomer? The Gemara says we learn it from a kal vachomer, which I think is so funny, right? That if we can learn that hekesh and that, right, meaning, remember we said kal vachomer when we had hekesh to kal vachomer works, so then kal vachomer gzera shava can then be followed by a kal vachomer. So we're using a kal vachomer to teach that a kal vachomer is valid if beforehand was a gzera shava. Next, gzera shava and then binyan av, we say teku. We're not sure, it's unresolved. Next, kal vachomer and then a hekesh. Can we do that? One opinion is you can. The other opinion is we don't know, and therefore maybe it's a machloket. Kal vachomer and then gzera shava. The Gemara says you can. Kal vachomer and then a kal vachomer. Can you do that? And the Gemara says, of course, it's a kal vachomer, right? So which is very funny. And then the Gemara actually says this is what's called a kal vachomer, the son of a kal vachomer, right? Because we used it to teach another kal vachomer, and therefore the answer is yes, it can work. What about kal vachomer and binyan av? The Gemara actually says that let's learn it from a bird that is slaughtered in the Beit HaMikdash, and in the end, we actually say that it is unresolved. Okay, the Gemara actually, maybe I think we will do into Daf 51 and just finish up this section, so we don't have to go back to it next week. It's now going to do the Binyan Av, and if you look at our chart, you can see it's all unresolved because we're not sure if once you learn a Binyan Av, can you now learn any other thing from it. And the Gemara goes through different permutations and says that we're not sure if you can teach a kal vachomer, a gezerah shava, or a hekesh from a binyan av, but maybe to another binyan av that might be okay, but basically that remains unresolved. And with that, we finish even into Daf 51, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we will pick this up next Monday night on the same at the same time. Hopefully next week will be a little easier. Yeah, good luck.
Go ahead,
Questions?
Lynn. Of course I have a question. Lynn, did you want to say something? No, she's not here.
Yeah, I thank you because I do have to run. It gets dark soon, and I can't drive after dark. I just put in the comments a while back. You were saying something about intention, and it made me think of this question: that if we leaned on the animal, because we're always talking about the kohen's intention. But if I leaned on the animal with an improper, it'd be accidental intention, a confusion, like it's supposed to be my sin offering and I confessed for guilt or something. Say, I'm confused. Is there some kind of statement that we make that the kohen would then hear and can correct us, or is it all invalidated?
Okay, great question. I think exactly because of this question, one opinion in the Gemara was it doesn't matter what your intentions are. You brought the animal. The kohen is very good at keeping the right intentions, hopefully, even though we just spent 40 daf saying not always. But we hope that the kohen will be more careful, and therefore you bought an animal, you brought it to the Beit HaMikdash, done. And therefore, your intentions are less important in terms of the technicality of the service of the sacrifice. Obviously, if when you bought the sacrifice, you were like, ugh, I hate God, I don't know what I'm doing, then the sacrifice doesn't count. But again, another opinion is no, your intentions do matter, and therefore if you have improper intentions, it will mess up the sacrifice. But again, as we saw, it's a difference of opinion. So it's interesting, actually, because of what you just said. Okay. Yeah.
Remember what the schematic that you showed us, and it was west, and the sanctuary was west, and there were these two things. Where exactly was the Holy of Holies?
The top of the west.
Where it said sanctuary, that's actually
yes, if you continue.
Okay. But there was a line there. There was a line. You don't go past the line.
What line? Let me just bring up a picture.
It was the line right on the other side of the word sanctuary.
Here, hold on 1 minute. I'll put up the picture. Let's see if I could just make it bigger, and then I'll show you on my screen. Hold on. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna put up the picture. Okay, I don't love this picture because it's backwards, and like I said, I like when north is on the top, but let me just show you.
Well, I have it in my mind, so you just look at it. Don't bring it, just look at it. Well,
okay. Here, do you see this picture?
Yeah.
Again,
more or less.
Here, north is on the bottom, which bothers me, but okay, fine. Here is, again, hold on a minute. Here is here's, 1 second. The altar is the square on the left. If you go into the sanctuary, right, this is, sorry.
Oh, I see what
1
you're doing.
second.
You're going the other way. Okay, I got it now.
You see, I don't like when people do this because it's misleading. I like
So if
north
I
at the
just
top.
keep going, that circle with the red around, that's the holy.
Exactly.
Got
Exactly.
it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's the Holy of Holies, right? There's a line, that's the curtain. And then if you see right in here's the golden altar, the Mizbeach, here's the right, the menorah, the table.
I can't, so small.
Oh,
yeah.
Should I make it bigger?
No, because I'm satisfied.
Okay, great. Yes.
And what about when you say binyan of? Doesn't that mean the building of the fathers or the understanding of the fathers? Something like that. So doesn't that really? That's why it's unresolved, because it's greater in a sense than the other categories, isn't it?
So binyan av literally means like the building of the father, but it's conceptual. The father is what we would call a general category, and I'm building a general category that will include, right, subcategories, right? If you remember in Shabbat, we talked about the av melacha, right, like the parent activity, again, not the parent, but the activity, the parent activity, and the tolada, the subcategory, right? So the child, but we're talking conceptually, general and then specific.
And the one on the bottom is general.
Binyan
is all general.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Exactly. It's super complicated. Super complicated.
No,
but I
nothing
think,
like Sanhedrin. No, it's not.
Okay. I would say that really this is about understanding the concepts, as either superficial or as deep as we can. These concepts are important just because in this Masechet, we're doing a lot of exposition of verses, right? We're going to learn one thing from another. It's not always so clear all the details of every sacrifice. And therefore, we're going to use all of these tools to understand all the laws. That's basically the point.
Okay. I stare at you a lot. Not intentionally, I'm listening. But if you don't go home and go to bed, you're going to be sick tomorrow.
Yes, I'm
going
sorry.
To sleep
no,
in 5
don't say such a thing. We don't make her sick. Just she'll do what she wants.
I'm not going to make her sick. I can see it in her eyes.
Refuah shlema, and
I'm getting better.
may you be so safe. Be safe this week, everyone.
I like that. I like yours better.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Good night.
Have
Thank you,
a
Rabbi.
great week.
Rabbinate. Thank you. Okay.